We are going to talk about digital cargo theft, the digital heist. There's a lot to get through. We haven't got a ton of time, so we're going to start with super quick introductions. We're going to go along the line. I am David Shillingford, and I have been in the Army. I've been a startup founder. I've been an investor. Now I'm an advisor, but if you ask my wife, she'll tell you I'm a flower farmer, because that's what she does, therefore that's what I do. Ryan.
I'm Ryan Joyce. I'm the CEO of Genlogs. We have a nationwide network of cameras that watch all truck activity on the roads for a number of compelling reasons.
You were in the CIA. Did you plan this light thing? Are you handicapping? Like, this is bright.
We're waterboarding on the second half.
Okay,
here.
good. Okay. My name is Michael Caney. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Highway. Several years ago, we brought the concept and category of carry identity to market. Before Highway, I was an operator as a freight broker for about 20 years. And so now I just sit with smart people and pretend to be smarter than I am.
Johnny McCord, I'm the CEO and founder of Loadshaw. 23 years in the insurance industry and solely focused in supply chain insurance and very much focused in freight and logistics insurance in North America in the latter sort of 10 years, which was the start of Loadshaw's journey, which was and is to primarily take our InsurTech MGA model to bring dynamic insurance products and bring a proactive risk management model to the supply chain through technology and data.
This is a slight aside. I said we haven't got a lot of time, so I got to listen to myself. But you said MGA model. So I think this is important because insurance is such a big part of this discussion. People generally don't understand the difference between an insurance company, an insurance agent, and an insurance broker. People think, they'll say, this is my insurance company, and it's in fact their insurance broker. Johnny just said MGA. So explain what is an MGA and how does it fit in? Because it's important to today's discussion.
Yeah, it's a good question. Another pseudonym from the insurance market. So MGA stands for Managing General Agent, and ultimately it's an insurance business, specialist insurance business that ultimately underwrites and binds policies on behalf of insurer. So it's very different to an insurance broker agent, primarily because we have underwriting control, and therefore we're providing, or the MGA provides pricing, terms and conditions, and generally handles claims. So one thing that's different from an insurer is that an MGA does not bring risk onto its own balance sheet. So it takes capital from the carrier. So with the involvement of the MGA model today, obviously MGAs are coming through with data and technology-driven approaches to bring more data-powered and tech-powered insurance products.
Right, so you can invest your money in tech rather than having a balance sheet capital to pay claims, but you can still sell through agents and brokers.
Absolutely, yes.
Cool.
Very important piece.
Thank you. Did you get all that? We'll come back to insurance. Let's start just talk a little bit about the problem of cargo theft. Don't want to spend a ton of time on it because you've been to a lot of panels talking about the problem of cargo theft rather than the solutions. So we want to spend more time talking about the solutions. I think the thing to really hit on here is that, there's been an evolution of cargo theft over the years, warehouse break-ins, and then evolving into, let's steal it while it's in the truck. That's going to be easier. Let's figure out how to do that while the driver's away from the truck or it's being left outside the back of Walmart over the weekend. But what we've seen over the last few years, but particularly in the last 24 months, is a very significant increase in what we're going to talk about today, which is theft by deception. There's a lot of different things you'll hear it called, strategic theft, but I think theft by deception is a good way of describing it because that's what it is. And you've got companies or their logistics agents essentially giving a load to a thief. Now, it's a little more complicated than that. So what I'm going to ask, if you can kick this off, Ryan, there's a lot of different ways in which the thieves are going to do this, and it's critical to figuring out the solution is trying to understand how are they doing it. So start with the simplest version of this that should never happen but does happen, and then we'll just go up.
Yeah, there are a number of ways that it can happen, but I think one of the main attack vectors is when someone says, hey, I have a truck that could cover that lane with the right equipment, but they actually do not, or they're not intending to do it themselves, but they're using that to gain access to the load details to go pick up that load. And then there's a number of ways that it goes wrong after that. They broker it out to someone else, redirect the shipment. They bring in their own truck bearing the actual MC number on the side of the carrier that they might have hacked. It could start from hacking, but at the end of the day, it all comes down to this isn't a legit carrier for the most part that has been running those lanes regularly with the right equipment. There's some, like you said, deception now involved.
That's someone pretending to be a carrier that they're not. And I mean, there are all sorts of layers here where it can get a bit more sophisticated and more difficult to detect. So maybe you could describe a few of those, Michael.
Yeah, Ryan's 100% right. It's either someone is pretending to be a carrier, or they are a carrier and they were doing things right. The way that we think about it is it's a layered approach. So you have a couple of different ways in the process that attack vectors can emerge. One is just synthetic identity credential abuse, right? Somebody sharing code, somebody logging in, somebody having access to things they're not supposed to have access to. A second thing is, this is kind of what Ryan was talking about, where compliance, I would call it shallow, but it's not deep, right? It's very hard to do on the fly. We're going to talk about a layered data approach probably on this panel at some point, but where something looks right? It looks like the user's right. They did have a physical footprint there at some point, but contextually it doesn't work, right? And so when you go to apply it at the load level, when you go to think about, is this the right user? Is it the right truck? Is the VIN on the policy? And you contextualize all of that at the load level, then it begins to fall apart. But there are a number of layers before you ever get to the load where a bad actor can get in. The other thing I would submit to you is that because they're better, when they hit, they have to hit in volume. Because one of us is going to catch them really quickly. So they don't steal loads over weeks at a time. They steal them in hours at a time, right? And so they're hitting hard, and then because they know they're going to get burned. Ryan's going to see pictures of them. We're going to catch them in our digital. Like, something's going to happen. And so the problem is not just the sophistication, but the volume, the impact of the theft.
So, Johnny, from an insurance standpoint, because as we just discussed, you're an MGA, it means that you're making underwriting decisions and it means that you're actually handling the claims. What are you guys seeing in terms of the different types of theft claims that you're seeing? Is it primarily these types of tactics, or is it a bit of a mix?
Yeah, I think it's still very much a systemic issue. This that these theft losses are occurring through deception. I think if you look at the figures that were released last year, there was a 60% increase or surge within the total theft losses that came through, but actually only 18% in incident increase. So what that tells us is that, whilst obviously crowbar, physical theft is still happening, theft by deception is on the rise, but also the theft by deception is focused on larger, smarter criminals, and larger losses are occurring through that deception piece.
Looking at it sort of through the insurance lens, to what extent are insurance companies wanting to or able to deny claims because it's a loss that should never have happened? I mean, there's a sort of, there's a history of that where if, there was a spate of high value loads being stolen from gas stations and parking lots where the driver sort of went off for an hour or two to have a sleep and have a shower. So they started to say, well, there's a limit to how long you can be away from the rig. And if it's longer than that, we'll deny the claim. Is that, how are insurers dealing with this side of it?
I think traditional insurance is not necessarily looking at it in the most pragmatic way. It goes back to the layers and the importance of bringing in verification intelligence, movement intelligence, and obviously then the human processes. So traditionally, insurers are kind of looking at ways to reduce coverage, but obviously from the perspective of working with best-in-class solutions out there, we should be looking at ways of supporting and providing wider coverages based on the good actors or the good performers who are out there and penalising the bad actors.
Yeah, because traditionally insurers are one or two people removed from what we're talking about, and so really the only response they have is to either pay the claim or not pay the claim. Whereas what we're going to get into now is where insurers could potentially be, which is kind of at the coalface, being part of the solution. I'm looking out. I know there's a microphone going around. If anyone has got a question, put your hand up. We're not going to wait to the end to do that because we'll inevitably run out of time. So put your hand up, whistle, whatever it is, and we'll take the question. Here we go. We got one here. So you see, we're serious. We are actually going to take the question.
Thank you. Ray Roberts with Conduit. We're doing unique things on the security side, but a question for the panel. How do we catch it early? Is it trailer number checks in and we can see if it's stolen? Do we need to verify VIN? What do we in the software space do to stop it early?
Right. I think you guys all got that, but the question's basically, what about prevention? How do we get ahead of this? What are the things that can be done to prevent that? So I believe we have an answer ready to go.
Yeah, I'll take a crack at it to begin with, and I want to definitely let Michael from Highway chat through it as well, because I'll say from the beginning, if anyone's trying to sell you that there's one silver bullet or one panacea, move on. And so let's just start with that right there. Genlog sits in the same tech stacks as Highway around a lot of the top brokerages in the space. And because there is a digital and there's a physical element to theft. Digitally, they're trying to get access to that load. Physically, they either do or do not operate on the roads or operate on those lanes. And just as a little bit background, we alluded to it earlier, my background came out of CIA, where I spent almost 2 decades in the intelligence community. We had an issue there. And that issue was that in the early 2000s, we added a button on CIA.gov's website. In the upper right-hand corner, you could click it. It'll say report information. And you could go there and fill out a form and report information through the dark web to the CIA. And that is awesome to get access to sources all over the world. But it's a huge headache that we were presented with how do you validate if these people are real or not? If they're trying to give you real information or they're trying to actually lure you out to harm CIA officers. And so we were dealing with what we called double agents at the time. Fast forward 10, 20 years later, here I am now dealing with double brokers. And when we talk about prevention, there's a digital element for sure here. Hey, was that load booked from a consistent IP address that we have seen that before? Could they have booked it through as many trucks as they have? How many loads are they trying to book? And this is digitally, you can look at that in the way that Highway does, and I think they do an exceptional job being that first layer of defense of, hey, is this matching the digital footprint of the load today as we've seen it consistently over the last few months? But then we also look from the Genlog's perspective, has anything changed about their physical footprint on the roads? And we've investigated now about 500 stolen loads over this last year. What we've noted in about 90% of them is those MCs, those motor carriers, they were real. They were legitimate. They were operating on the roads. And at some point, they disappeared. And when they disappeared, that almost certainly in every time is when they sold their motor carrier number to some buyer. And that came often with the email, and it came often with the cell phone. Well, that's really great to bypass two-factor authentication out there, which means you got to be looking, hey, has the physical footprint altered that also matches with the digital footprint? Now, when those two are in harmony, I tell you 99 times out of 100, you're not going to have issues, 99.9% of the time. When one or two are off digitally or physically, that's when you take another look. That's how you preempt, hey, something's off here. Frankly, it should happen before that truck gets to your door. If you're a shipper, your managed transportation, your 3PLs need to be using some technology to stop that. But absolutely, we are developing technology that when a carrier does pull up to your door, and I should say a truck, because it may bear the right MC number, it may bear the right name, it just may not be associated with that carrier. It is someone impersonating. We see in some of the more egregious cases, like with the Sing organization that was brought down this last year, we were tracking them on the roads. Like Michael Caney said, every few weeks they would pop up and they'd hit 6 different brokerages and shippers, and they would literally go to those gates bearing the right name and the right number of the carrier that was supposed to be there. The problem is that carrier was either defunct or they had been hacked and they were operating the roads on the East Coast. Those thefts were happening on the West Coast. But that's something that if you have a layered tech stack that's bringing in the digital and the physical together, man, we could shut that down.
Yeah, you make a really good point.
Before you get in, just explain in a bit more detail, how do you actually do that in terms of, you talk about the physical. What are you guys doing to get that data?
Yeah, we have a nationwide network of cameras from California, New York, Minnesota down to Miami, everywhere in between, and we're collecting on 15 million images of trucks as they transport around the roads every day. And we will see a carrier that, hey, we see them, 20, 30 times a day across our networks for sometimes years, definitely months. And when that drops to 0 suddenly, that's when the carrier disappeared. And so that's we use it in the way that cybersecurity is looking at network packets coming over. Hey, is there a spike? Is there a drop? That's when we flag anomalous activity. We're doing that physically by looking at the trucks on the roads.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Michael.
No, you're great. So to Ryan's point, when you think about the digital and physical, has anybody here ever gotten a loan? Like applied for a loan with a lender? No, nobody in this room borrows money. Okay. Did you connect your bank account with Plaid? Has anyone ever connected their bank account with Plaid? Okay, one guy. Awesome. This guy uses Plaid. The rest of you faxed your stuff over. It's the same thing. When freight is now a digital transaction. Full stop. Right? And the only thing that matters in a digital transaction is who's the identity of the user behind that and what truck is going to go pick that up. And this is what Ryan's talking about. It's very interesting because most of the time when we protect things in the cyber world, most of it can be done electronically. Right? So when you go apply for a loan, you connect your bank accounts with Plaid, they're watching for anomalies. Did you go buy something else? Did you receive a big gift that's going to have to be paid back, right? Like any of you that have been humans have gone through this in your own life. We do the same thing on a freight transaction. The problem breaks down to your specific question, what can you do? Stop making decisions. Johnny and I do a lot of business together. And almost every theft that we see, a user made a decision that could have stopped it. I know Ryan sees the same thing. He's like, why did you load this carrier? Why did you give a 2-truck carrier 7 loads? Right? There are very basic questions that we all ask, but what happens in freight is we still don't think about it as a digital transaction that needs to be digitally secured. So when you think about trust, the ability for a human to log into something and make a decision when it comes to a digital freight booking is over. Because you don't know the hygiene of the motor carrier's inbox. You don't know who's actually in the truck. You don't know if that truck, there's a carrier I could pull up right now that has 200 power units that's committing insurance fraud. Because they represent 50 on the ELD. And they use fake trip leases. The trucks are not insured. And some of you in this room are loading that equipment. And we tell you not to. We tell you don't. I don't know who is insuring that truck. It's 100% insurance fraud. But every day, a user will ignore it. And so the answer is, what can you do? When you buy a system, adopt it. Right? That's one of the things that Ryan and I have talked about. Like, there is no panacea, but starting by just adopting the things that you pay for already will go a very long way.
Like Ryan, I realize we're here to talk about the problem and solutions in general, but I think it's important and interesting for you to describe in detail how Highway actually does what you do.
Well, my CIA buddy taught me not to give away all the secrets. Like, that's the last thing you do. So here's one thing I'll say, and that's only half of a joke. Because I will bet you money there are bad actors in this room. Like 100%. Because they're in the, I'll give you one thing that we do. Right now, if you're a freight broker in this room, I'm watching your network to look for the bad actors that are moving your freight today. Ryan's doing the same thing. Because the challenge is that we went really digital 10 years ago. And we have more data than we've ever had. But data without enforcement is just commentary. And so what we're trying to do and think about is use the data that you all have to develop transaction level enforcement. So how do we do what we do? I'm not going to give you all the details, but it comes down to transaction level enforcement. And when you enforce something at a transaction level, you can cause the user to have to do things to re-verify. So they might have gotten through a 2FA at one point, but they might not be able to do it again, right? When we IDV them, we look for, you'll appreciate this, Ryan, a bad actor showed up at our office angry after they put fake IDs in the system. Like they wanted to negotiate this. We're like, you put fake IDs in Highway. So the brazenness with which they operate is not to be underestimated.
So, Johnny, from your perspective, because you're not a traditional insurer, you're an MGA, and have built a tech stack. When we hear about what these guys are doing and how to solve the problem, it feels as if there is a solution, not a single solution, but there are solutions out there. From a Loadsure standpoint, how do you interact with solutions like this?
Yeah, it's a good question. Obviously, we're talking about layers here, and integrating in a way can be deemed as technical. The way that we look at integrating, of course, we have a tech stack that integrates, but our form of integration in this discussion is ultimately unique, economics. Obviously for us, it's about driving down the cost of insurance, making sure that practices are followed, and working with the verification intelligence, working with the motion intelligence, working with the human processes, and also then bringing in that factor that we bring to the table of the dynamic insurance model that ultimately can reward good behavior and penalize bad behavior. So, our insurance policies are very much dynamically driven to make sure that the appropriate risk score is driven by the price that we apply to each policy. So going back to that transactional level, it's so important to be that granular, both from your model and both from our model, to ensure that we can actually make the unique economics more attractive for those that are following the procedures and mitigating the loss of theft through the practices that are out there.
Yeah, it comes back to traditional insurers don't have the ability to do that type of integration. They're writing an annual policy based on certain assumptions forward-looking for the next 12 months. There's a pretty big world of difference between that and what you guys are doing, where you're integrated into the TMS. You can see individual loads, individual load risk, and whether or not they're screening that through Genlog's Highway or whatever else.
Yeah, there's no one shipment that has the same risk profile, and it's identifying those risk profiles with the appropriate data.
Right. So I think one other thing that I think is an important context to wrap around this is we talked about the physical, we talked about the digital. There's also the human, and I think for a company that's sitting in the audience, that three-legged stool of what should a company do in terms of the sort of the human, the corporate organization versus digital versus physical. When you see your clients being successful, what are you seeing them doing in terms of the human side of this?
What I'll say, I agree with Michael when he says, don't make a decision to an extent. What he's saying is don't override that glaring warning sign that's saying, don't use this carrier. But I think, frankly, with all of the digital information we have out there, one of the risks is that we just cede the decision-making to the computers, that we cede those decisions that, hey, we're going to just go ahead and transact this freight. And you talk about the human element. I would say inherently in the industry right now, it is a dangerous industry. You're in a dangerous neighborhood with all of the fraudsters out there and the thieves. And in a dangerous neighborhood, one of the things you don't do is that anyone that knocks on your front door, you don't open it and say, yeah, come on in. If you want to transact, you want to get to know your neighbors in a dangerous industry or a dangerous neighborhood, what you do is you figure out, hey, who's worthy of trusting and figuring out those signals and then going and knocking on their door. Because now no one's going to come and invade home robbery and this and that. You're going to get to know a good neighbor. And what I say some of the issues is people frankly have just gotten a little lazy with how easy it is to do high throughput posting on load boards and opening yourselves up to the potential of a bad actor walking in through your front door. We provide a lot of data that's saying this is a real carrier that has run Dallas to Chicago every single day for the last 3 years with a flatbed. If you need to move flatbed Dallas to Chicago and we see them empty, that is a great carrier to go knock on their door. And so we could tell you, looking at the data out there from the digital and the physical side, who's bad. We can also tell you who's good and who should you be moving towards and assigning those loads either on a contract or spot basis. And then you just don't have to worry about that strategic theft element of this.
Yeah. It's appropriate to call me on my hyperbole. Maybe some people can make decisions, but I think that's what you're saying. Like, you would, in your world, like you would want a trained security person to make a decision, not everybody, right? And so what it really comes down to is process discipline and incentive alignment. So one of the things that I can say, having run large brokerage floors for most of my career, is we still haven't completely fixed incentive alignment. This is something Johnny and I see when we sit with clients where they're worried about cutting off capacity. And Ryan and I are over here going, hey, there's other capacity out there. You just have to call them, right? But we have an army of logistics representatives in this country that they weren't trained to think about security first, right? And so you've got to have rigorous process discipline. You have all of the software in the world, but I mean, we have it, right? With we have a SOC 2 designation. Like, I have to go through trainings every year. I have a CIO that tells me what I can and can't do with my email anymore, right? And so I think what Ryan and I would both tell you, we come at this a little bit differently. We're not that smart. We're contextualizing things that have worked in other industries to this business, right? So when we think about finance, we think about authentication, authorization, and capability management. And so every single market has gone through this. This is not a new problem, right? We have Visa for a reason, right? We have the New York Stock Exchange because of the Buttonwood Agreement. Go read about it. It's a lot of fun. I didn't know what a Buttonwood tree was until Jordan Graff told me about it. But every single market has gone through this evolution, right? We are getting the market we deserve because we ran it without enforcement. And so whether you talk about process discipline, you talk about security, what we're really saying is you've got to have enforcement at the transaction level. You can't leave it to chance. Is that fair? I mean, you're the security guy. I'm just a freight broker.
No, absolutely fair. And I think what's really cool is it works when you do it right. And we have a few mutual customers that can boast this year that they have like a 0.003 critical incident rate because they have put in the right tech stack, they trust that process, and they make the effort to reach out to good capacity that's out there in the market. There's a lot of it. And if you're just chasing low rates, you're gonna reap what you sow. And so 100%, I couldn't echo that more.
If I'm an insurance company, I want to speak to those companies. So have we got another question?
Hi, Harold, Level 5 Fleet. So a question for Ryan, actually. Not sure if you already have this in your program, but what's your thought about having onboarding program for new carriers or carriers that are expanding, basically where there is no historical data, but they're actually legitimate and they're trying to expand into a new lane?
We can't hear up here. We apologize.
Was the question about onboarding?
Yeah, so basically, I think if I understood it correctly, is that a lot of the intelligence is about historical data. And I wonder what happens if the carrier is legitimate, but they just don't happen to be running that particular lane, whether you do have any program to get them onboarded so that they're not flagged, or what happens in those particular situations?
I don't know if I got it 100%, so I'm gonna ask the question I think I heard, which is, how do you guys think about carrier onboarding?
Yeah.
How are you plugged into? Because
I got hot sports opinions about carrier onboarding. I wish we could get rid of the term, because onboarding, the word onboarding implies a one-time event, right? And so what happens, like for years, brokers thought about onboarding, or freight forwarders or any shippers or anybody, is Is there a motor carrier number? Is there an insurance certificate? Do I do some basic checks? And so onboarding, just I think the words we use matter. And I think the language that we use in this industry to discuss the way we manage carriers has to evolve. So I like to think about it as identity in motion. When someone represents who they are, what they're capable of, and whether or not they're authorized, how is that changing over time? And there are many ways you can measure those changes, both digitally and physically. And it's too many that I can list for you. Like when I was a broker, I had a list in my cubicle, and I would have to go through this list on every load, and I would look at Carrier 411, and I would phone a friend, and I would check a super secret email group that none of us are on. Right? But the point is you can't onboard. Like if you think about, can I look at this carrier at a snapshot in time and then trust it in perpetuity, you've started at a loss.
And I'll give you a great example of that. Over the holidays, we onboarded a broker who we had been pursuing for a year, and they kept they would have a stolen load, and they'd come back each month, and we'd be like, we can help. And we finally were ready to get on board. And the first thing they did is they gave us their list of carriers, about 38,000 of them. And we ran them through and found that 19,000 of them were actually eligible to continue to operate freight with the FMCSA. That was almost 20,000 that were not, that were just still there, static from having been onboarded that one time, that snapshot in time. But the insidious part was that 2,000 of that 19,000 had disappeared from the roads in the last 90 days, which means that's the 2,000 that when that carrier reaches out saying, hey, I'll take that load, they look and say, oh, you're onboarded, you're good to go. And then all of a sudden that is likely a sold MC that now that freight's going to disappear. And so this continued, whether it's identity in motion, some type of continuous monitoring, I couldn't agree more. There is no such thing as a one-time check. It is every day, is this carrier still out there? Has things changed? Is the IP address here, or is it in some other Eastern European country? That's what you need to be checking constantly, and you need to make sure you have providers that aren't doing one-time onboarding, but are always looking out and looking after your back.
Yeah, the one thing I would add that neither of us can control is the TMS provider's ability to integrate. So we have a solution stack. I'm getting ready to start certifying TMS providers at the level at which they're able to integrate, because there are freight brokers that have open fraud vectors every day because their own TMS provider will not prioritize certain solution sets on the roadmap. I'm not trying to be discourteous, but that's just an absolutely true statement. I mean, we have solutions that will stop theft. Ryan has things that will stop theft. But if you don't integrate it into the broker's workflow, it's very difficult to adopt. And so I have customers coming to me and I'm like, you're going to have to change providers. Because if your core TMS, ERP, whatever it is you're using, can't consume the solution stack, you're going to be at a disadvantage because you're going to have to do manual workarounds.
All right, we got 2 minutes left, so we're gonna wrap up, because I want to get a single thought from each of you in terms of if there was one thing you could say to everyone here, particularly those that are actually running supply chains, what would be the thought that you want to leave them with? I'll start with you, Johnny.
I think mine comes back to a question and a change of question, really. The question used to be, where is my freight? And I think that question now needs to be, do I trust who has my freight, and can I prove it? And that's the most important thing here. And that question stems down to everything, all the way down to the insurance policy and the way that the coverage can be applied.
Yeah, to Johnny's point, trust alone doesn't scale. You need enforceable standards. Markets don't scale on trust, they scale on standards. If you look at any successful market in the history of our capitalistic nation, markets scale on enforceable standards. So data without enforcement is commentary. Doesn't matter how many ELD connections I have, doesn't matter I got 1.4 million VINs in highway. Doesn't matter. If it's not enforceable, we don't need more data. We don't need new data. You have to have enforcement, and you have to build that enforcement at the transaction level.
And I would say you can hide in a lot of ways. You can hide With in a digital identity, you can hide between an O that's been changed to a 0 in an email account. There's a lot of ways that digitally you can try to look and try to identify where there's issues. One thing you can't hide is, do you have a 53-foot drive-in with a truck connected to it on a road or not? And so this is where I really think bridging that digital and physical divide is a critical step to making sure you can lock down and protect your freight.
I'm gonna finish by going back to something that Michael said, which I think is spot on, and that is what we are seeing now has happened in other industries. So we know how this plays out. And the way it plays out is that the criminals figure out how to exploit an industry and its processes and its technology. And then solution providers like this figure out what to do about it. We're in that phase now. The third phase is adoption by the industry. And that happens in phases. There are the early adopters. Then there are those who are like, oh, that seems to work because I can win business, or I don't lose business. And then there are the late adopters, and that's painful for them. And I think in this instance, it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out over the next 12, 24 months. I think it's fascinating to see how the insurance industry is involved in that or not involved in that. And I think you'll start to see differences there in terms of the policies, claims policies, and there's no single solution. It's a layered approach, but it's got to be integrated. It's got to be digital. Thank you very much.